Okay, so I just started doing a little bit of painting here on the character. I changed the resolution to 1024 because I thought, if you're up close to the character, then a little bit more resolution probably be a good idea, have it nice and smooth. I've just been painting directly on the character, and what I'm doing here is I use dodge to create the highlight, and just kind of dab it in with the radius turned down, opacity turned down quite a bit so that you can have control over how the highlight shows up. And then I just take this smudge, boost up the opacity, so that's the percentage of smudge you're going to have, and make kind of a narrow radius so that I can create these little sort of zigzags that make up sort of the stylized specular highlight. It's painted right on. And actually, I should be adding a new layer to do this sort of stuff so I can control the opacity, make layer-based modifications to it, but I'm just kind of quickly roughing out the base layer here anyway, and then I'd probably add another layer to make touch-ups to it. I can use the burn tool here to darken along the edge here. I'm going to turn the opacity way down to like 13, maybe even less, like 6, and just kind of dust it in, kind of give it a little bit of darkness along the edge of the shine. If you look from back here, the character's shine looks pretty good, but it's a static image, so we're going to use the shader though to take care of that so that it'll kind of blend the static image with sort of a plain color of sorts that's going to be 3-tone shaded, and then use a specular map to give a more dynamic version of this sort of effect around the surface of the hair. I've never actually done it before, so this will be my first time doing it. It's just a technique that I thought of, and I'm pretty sure it's going to work. So just bear in mind that I haven't done it before, and I'm just kind of giving you a rough idea of how you could do it. So add a little bit of burn down here. So what this does is we can create this sort of blended burn that starts off dark. It creates kind of like an environmental map illusion where if you blend down from here dark, it's almost like if you had a reflection of mountains in the distance or trees, and you kind of have the horizon here and then the regular sky up above. When you look at it from the distance, your brain's not really sure why, but it looks like sort of partially a reflection and sort of specular highlighting of the hair. It gives you the impression that the hair is kind of partially reflective of the environment, but just generally giving you the impression that it is hair because of the little lines, the little zigzags in it. And it's kind of stylized in a sort of anime kind of style. So this blending is not very smooth. I'm just going to take a quick peek at this image. I'd probably go in Photoshop or Paint tool or Krita or whatever and smoothen out some of these gradients that are coming off the dark spots. Like right here, it looks really bad, so I just smoothen this out. Just airbrush in some regular orange, whatever the surrounding color is, to kind of give it a smoother blend. Maybe take this orange from down here and pull it up. And take this smudge tool and dial down the radius a bit and just kind of... Oh yeah, I got the opacity turned down way too much. With the smudge, you want the opacity up a fair amount. With the burn and dodge, you want it way down. If you want to do really good details, you can use the clone brush, and what you can do, go to front view for example, just create a plane right beside the character and put a texture map on it, and then just clone brush from that onto here. But there's also a way to do it and set it up in settings so that you can get your stamp right from the screen itself. So then you can go into windowed mode and have a little window beside 3D Studio that has the image that you want to clone stamp from, and then you can put your texturing right onto the surface that way. So that way you can kind of put in finer details like fabric material and stuff like that. And if you want to texture the material, like give it a bumpiness or whatever, you can also add like a bevel style bump blending option in like Photoshop or something like that, and then that way you get sort of a better textured material. In the case of the hair, I don't think we'd do anything like that because it's going in every which direction, so it'd be kind of hard, at least as far as using a blending option to do it. But I mean, you can add a layered pattern and then use like an additive or a multiply or something like that in Photoshop, and then get those little hair strands and just warp it and have it so that that additive blended part provides those highlights that warp over top of the piece that you're working on. So what we could do if we want to preserve this layer and just kind of experiment on a new layer is you can use this duplicate layer and then go on this layer and just use the burn tool. Again, bring it way down, boost up the radius a little bit. Just want to kind of blend it down So you kind of get that mountain effect. Maybe we could use a blur here, because there's something funny going on with the way the burn was reacting to the colors. You can kind of get the blur to blend it down too, but I'd prefer to use the smudge with more narrow fitting, higher opacity, because then that way you can create kind of hair strand type effects, like generally go in the direction that the hair is on the surface. And then from a distance, it actually looks pretty good. But again, like a dynamic specular hair shader would look way better. So you'd have like a proxy specular texture that you'd use a reference to tell it where the highlights should be the brightest and the darkest, depending on where the specular highlight is. Just a percentage multiplier for how intense it should be. So like, for example, in case you're not understanding what I'm saying here, if we had this huge specular highlight, like right here in the shader, what it's going to do is it's going to multiply what we had in the specular texture that has this sort of hair-like bumpiness to it by whatever the intensity value is of this final lighting that's on the surface. And by combining them like that, you'll end up with essentially what we just painted here, except it'll be really bright in where these hairs are, these lines, and then darker where as it gets further away from them, because the multiplication value is much lower. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of finish up the hair. Oh yeah, I got to do these ones, set the UVs for them and texture them. And as you can see, there's some problems with the geometry here. Like right here needs to be fixed. A scene on the back here, I think there's like some vertices that need to be welded. For the mesh smooth version, you can see that some of the geometry protrudes through. That's going to be hidden anyways, it just probably needs to be deleted. For now, I'd say don't worry about any of that until you're done. And then what we're going to end up doing is we'll save it as a new file, then we're going to go collapse all, collapse 2, whichever, and make it an editable poly. And then you can go ahead and you can modify the geometry, and it'll adapt so that it's keeping the same equivalent UV coordinates. So you're not going to lose your UV coordinates. If we tried to go down here though, modify that, because of the way the modifier stack works, it could screw things up and it might not work out and you end up losing all your UV coordinate data because the order of the vertices could get mixed up. One thing I forgot to mention is in any 3D painting program you're using, it's oftentimes easier to tell what kind of color you're getting if you go into flat shading mode. And I know you can do this in other paint programs. I know you can do it in Mudbox, for example. If you want some really good texturing tools, Mudbox is a lot better than just the Viewport Canvas Painter and 3D Studio. Another thing to be cautious of is if you're doing smudging or anything across seams, there's a seam right here, and it becomes really apparent when you start doing stuff like that around the seam. So if you do something like that, and you've used up your Control Z's, for example, you can either paint over it, or you can just use a blur tool. And the same thing applies in Mudbox. Just blurring around those seams seems to fix it up pretty good. And so if you have really detailed painting, you can use clone stamp painting too, and clone stamp from the surface into another part where you want to kind of add that detail back in. Okay, so I kind of rough painted it, and from a distance it looks pretty good. Go to the shaded mode here with low poly, you kind of get an idea of how this character is going to look. Kind of cleaning up some of the geometry here. I'm using the selection tool by numeric equal to 5 sides, and what we could also do is change this to 4 and just say greater than. 5-sided faces here, so we'll clean that up first. So it looks like all we need is just to cut down the middle. We've got our quad for this one. Yeah, because I'm otherwise not sure how this qualifies as 5-sided. We hit F4. Oh, there's a mid vertex here, that's why. So I'll just target weld that to here. And so now, side test greater than, and now we get these two. I'll just average weld them. Only notice that because I collapsed this, when I do tweaks to the geometry, I'm not losing the UV data. We got this weird anomaly here, or have this polygon that I want to keep here just in case the hair stretches and this part becomes visible underneath. What I think happened here is this just isn't added into the UV coordinates. It's not a smoothing group problem. I already checked that, clear all and number 1. What I'm going to do also is I'm going to add some geometry because I forgot some stuff, and I can do that now that I've collapsed. It's going to say OK for that. What we'll do is apply this to this also, and it just lacks the proper UV coordinates. And go UVW unwrap. And so when I do these little bits here, turn off map seams. Let's grab this first and hide it. Let's go point to point. and just unwrap these. It should do the trick. Probably get away with just doing that for that one. This stuff's likely less visible. Okay, then I'll just do one part at a time here. Start pelt, commit, relax, show checker. Oh, I should go face angles would be better. So what I did here was I just added a UV unwrap, and I just used view image, and I thought, well, I'll just put the coordinates around here, and that should be good. Don't need much resolution for those. And just did some very simple painting on them. So we'll collapse all again if I want. And now this is all part of hair. And our hair, just like our head, can be parented to the head bone. But if we wanted, we could create individual bones. And I might just do that for parts of the hair so that I can add deliberate movement of the hair, deliberate controlled wind movements on the hair if I want. We can also use a wind simulator too, and a flex modifier, and just simulate the motion of the wind blowing the hair against the ears and create a solid object here that we can use as a collider, and then the hair will kind of blow around it. But that's more for cinema stuff, or if we plan on doing morph targeting outputs of the character's animations. Thought I should mention too that piece of geometry here is looking like there's something wrong with it. All it was it wasn't receiving UV mapping, so I just selected those individual polygons and canvassed, stretched them, shrunk them down, found the neighboring ones just by selecting the polygon here to see where it highlighted in this map here. Then I shrunk those down, these ones down, brought them in nice and close here. I'm just gonna select these edges. You'll notice that it highlights this right side in blue, and what I can do is stitch to average, and then I can go in and just touch up the paint job here, either in Photoshop or whatever, or I could just do it right in here too. Let's save our current UVs. Viewport canvas. I'm just going to paint this regular orange using flat shading. Yeah, I might actually want to paint the other polygons in Photoshop because they're not going to receive paint when I paint in this mode. So I'll just grab this color here and sort of fix some of this up a bit. Okay, so I'm going to deselect this so it applies the texture, smooth highlight. I have a backup of the scalp here. So if we wanted to add this back onto the head, I just texture all of it and paint hair onto here. In case any of the flexing of the hair causes you to see anything underneath, you can do that. I have my hair so that no matter what, it's going to cover everything, and I'm going to have everything kind of anchored so that no matter how much stretches or distorts, it shouldn't sink into this part of the head because of the collision sphere and because of the way it's going to be anchored. So I can just hide this part of the geometry because that'll never actually be visible. After the edit poly, hit U, VW unwrap, grab edge here, and I'll actually just go point to point seams, hide the map seams, and hit F4 so it's easy to tell where the geometry is going, and just go from here to here, right click to end, zoom in, make sure that I didn't miss anything. If you imagine that it's all made out of paper or something, how it would kind of unwrap or unfold. And for the front, I want this to unwrap fairly flat, so I'm just going to add this seam here. I don't plan on painting around here anyways, it's just going to be uniform color, so this can all fold out this way and that way. That should work. If it doesn't work very good, we can just make modifications to the seams and recanvas it. Before we do this though, we'll hit yes. Let's make sure we fill in the mouth, the inside of the mouth. Kind of bridge that geometry. So I'm just gonna hit F3 so it's a little easier to tell what's going on here. I want to make quads going from one side to the other. You don't want to go down to this part because we've made modifications to the polygons and we don't want to lose that information. So just stick with your edit poly here. Let's turn off soft select. I'm using edge target weld. I could use bridge too. Just grab this bridge here and go from here to here. And if you hit F3, you can see what it's doing. And I think there's a way to just grab 3 sides and say make triangle, but I can't remember how to do that. But yeah, we can bridge here too, from here to here, and do like a triangle bridge. So I'm just gonna bridge here, and here, and here. There's ways you can do multiple ones at the same time too. Since it's the back of the mouth, it's gonna be really dark. We don't really care about the vertex normals being smooth, but I mean, we can do that too. So just cause, I'm just gonna add the normal smooth modifier. So this thing here, and first of all, we have to go into here and grab all of these, go into smooth, and pick smoothing group of 1. Everything should be really smooth looking now, as far as the normals go, and then go into UVW unwrap, we go back to edge mode, and point-to-point seams. First of all, we have to go to edit poly again, deselect this, then go to here, delete the mesh smooth off the modifier stack for now. I don't know what was going on with that, but now I can go point-to-point seams. Looks like it deleted my original point-to-point seams I had on here. Probably actually best to just delete this for now. Like, I've even seen people just cut the back of the ear and like 1 line slice from here to the tip and just figure out a way to get it to unfold everything from there. What I can eventually do once I get everything flattened out and relaxed really nicely is I can stitch some of this stuff back together. This part of the face, we want to keep it all together. I don't really want any seams in here, except because of the way I did the eyelashes as part of the face. You can do them separate too. You don't actually have to. And then you can still do morph targets with the separate object, animating and moving with the eyelid. I think I'll just make this whole thing here share UV coordinates. In fact, let's see, I might even want to do this. Now, hopefully I didn't do anything irrational there. I don't even know if this would really be necessary, but because this sticks out of the face and it's such a steep angle here, that's kind of why I'm separating it into different parts. This may create a seam issue with the eyelashes for painting, so I'll just have to keep that in mind when I'm painting and paint accordingly. Made that same mistake again. The inside of the mouth, definitely want to make it a separate paint piece, so that should work. I'll even make a split inside the mouth so that it's going to flatten out rather easily. So this part should peel apart fairly good, I think. So that may seem like a lot of seams for a head, but at least it would seem that way. Okay, let's select one of these. We'll just do the most obvious one first. And face selection to seams, pelt map. And what we'll do here is select the stretcher in freeform mode, hold Control and Alt, and scale it, and hit Start Pelt. Commit, rotate it a bit, and for checker pattern, click it, and you'll see the checkers. Let's get them to a bigger size. We'll scale this down, just a little easier to see where the distortions are. So you can see here it's kind of distorted. We'll go to Tools, Relax. I'm going to use face angles, hit Start. Relax it a bit more. You can see there's a problem over here. I don't want these to overlap, so we can go select, overlap, and we can see which parts are going to be a problem. So go to vertex mode and grab, move, click here, and then click one. Grab these and just kind of move them a bit. Not enough that it's going to change our relax solution very much. This one can go that way. We've got this little quad over here. It's approximately the same surface area, just kind of inverted it. And then I'll do the same on this side, where I'm just going to move these just enough to fix the result. And I think there was a problem in here too. Select, oh yeah, we gotta go face mode and go select, overlapped. You can even tell by looking at them, like there's definitely a problem there. This has to come up. Oh yeah, we got lots of weird things going on here. It wasn't showing a problem on this side, but there was a problem on that side. Grab that one. I'm trying to create that mouth hole again. So now, when we go back to polygon mode and select overlapped, should be fine. If we look in here, squares are very uniform, which is nice. And let's maybe do the eyelashes next. Expand the seams, pelt map, start pelt, commit. Now start relax. So transform. So we'll get it's roughly the right size here. So I'm just going to put this here. Or actually, I could put it right here at an angle, so it doesn't take up much space. I'll do the same thing to the other side. Okay, we'll grab one from the inside of the mouth, expand the seams, and pelt map. Start the pelt. Looks like we might have some missing geometry in there. Maybe just some empty triangles. I'm not sure where those would be, and you're not going to see them anyway, so I'm not really too worried about it at the moment. What's going on here? Let's do pelt map again, stretch it out more. Start pelt, commit, start relax. Oh, that's not going to work as a relax solution. So what's this right here? Somehow that's getting excluded, but it's not going to matter. This is going to be really dark. What we could do here is go start, keep boundary points fixed, and then try that. Definitely doesn't work. Try edges, doesn't work. So I would say I'm just going to go ahead and fix whatever's going on with the geometry here. There's something going on with these triangles, possibly something to do with duplicate vertices or something. So just going to fix that, come back, and I'm just going to probably add a seam too. Maybe do a top half of the mouth and a bottom half, and kind of do it that way. So I want to add kind of seamless detail to the tongue down here, if anything. So if anything, I'd have probably a seam to separate the top of the mouth from the rest of it. Okay, I'm going to go to edit seams here and just delete seams that I don't think are necessary now, because I made the seam go from here, so now I can do this whole top and then this whole bottom separately. So now it should work a lot better. So now we can go to relax, faces, start relax. Let's check the checker pattern. So the bottom part looks good now. Let's rotate that. That's the top. So you want the square sizes to be approximately the same. Okay, that's going to be for the inside of the mouth, so I'll just put that here. Same thing with this one. And there wasn't actually any problems with these polygons, so it's just having some conflict in how it was getting the UV coordinates because of where the seams were. Alright, so let's scale this, something like that. Let's find where the neighboring borders are. Hit edge mode, grab this edge. Okay, so we can grab this element. And if we want, we can just stitch this together. And without too much effort, just put this right in here and grab the edge. Oh, I don't want to select all of them, so unclick this and grab the edges that make up this one. Just to figure out which ones you're supposed to use. Do that, hit Control Z. Now we can go stitch to average. And these corners, you can't really do that. Let's grab this element, move it in nice and tight. So I decided to make a seam around the base of the neck and just chop it into two halves. And I'm just going to stitch this stuff together. The front's kind of a longer section, so we want to stitch these ones together. What I would then do is grab this, rotate it, and this one, rotate it. And we could grab this section here and do a horizontal line or something. So let's go vertex, this. This is where you could use soft select too, like just grab this here and this one and use soft select. I think you have to go vertex mode to actually see what it's affecting. So let's set this at 0. I'm going to grab that vertex and that vertex using control and scale them towards each other. Maybe these ones too. More so horizontal, so I'm just holding Alt here. Now I'm just going to select this edge along here. And I'll use stitch to average. Let's grab this sub-element, because it's one singular element now, and scale it so these are about the same size. I mean, if you wanted to, you could again use relax to kind of fix it up, and it looks way better already. You can grab this, expand, pelt, start relax, scale it to a size that makes sense. So I think this one kind of goes in here, on this side. And let's do the right side, same idea. Let's just hit mirror with that side. But we could technically put this at the same coordinates and have it receive the same painting values. And we can use mirror paint also and have separate UV coordinates. So you don't really have to worry about doing anything like that. So mirror back and put this over here. And we can have unique painting on both sides if we want. Okay, well, let's do the inside of the ear. Expand and start pelt, commit, relax. That looks pretty good. Just get the squares to the right size. This would be the ear cutout up here, so guessing that if I wanted to stitch this together here, I could. Let's just check with edge mode. just select individuals there. So yeah, we could do that. I don't want to tip it too much because I don't want to waste a bunch of space. So I'd probably just bring these edges and these edges gradually closer together, stitch them, and then do another relax to kind of get everything to look nice. And then you'd have the ears attached right to the sides of the head, and you can paint across there without being any seams. Just kind of showing what you can do. Let's go back to face or polygon, grab this back one here, expand. So I'm going to stitch this one onto here, or actually I'd probably better to stitch it onto the front. Start pelt, commit. I'm going to stitch it onto here. To do that, I'm probably going to have to move this little guy out of here, over to here. Let's get these squares to the right size. Okay, let's hit start relax. We've got some dysfunction going on here. Let's go edge angles and see if that works better. Yeah, kind of. Alright, looks like I can scale this down. Let's see where these edges are. So that would actually go with that. And this should actually go with that. And since I really wanted to stitch those together, I'd probably do that first, before attempting to stitch onto here. These top two, I'm not worried about stitching them onto this. We'll just have to be careful about painting up there. But these ones along here, I could do an average stitch, and it should look fine. Could even grab that and just do an average stitch here and grab this whole mess of polygons, relax it a bit. So now you can kind of position this where these would stitch on. Again, I don't want to use up a lot of space if I don't have to. I mean, I could play around with this quite a bit and get it to fit, but I'm not going to be using much detailed painting in that area, so I'm not worried about that. So I'm just going to put this here. I'm going to put this back and do the same thing on the back here. And face should be safe. We've got a reasonably good solution here, so that's about the right size. And I'm just going to shrink this down, and I'll just replicate that procedure for the other side. Alright, so once you're done, you should have very uniform looking squares all the way across the surface. You might have something like this. I'll just scale it so that it fits into this little UV space, this 0 to 1 UV space. And I might have to squash it horizontally to get it to fit because of the way we set it up, which is okay. Not squishing it too much in one direction, so it should be fine. You want it mostly to be a square before you even do this. This one would have been rather difficult to make into a perfect square in the first place, so it's a little bit of stretching to maximize how much texture space we're using. And then we're going to save the UVs, because you never know if you'll need to retrieve them or not. It's happened to me a few times. And now you should be ready to paint on the face. And we could use viewport canvas and paint generally how we want things painted. You can even mark things out so that you know where certain things should be painted, and then go into Photoshop later and just add detailed bits and pieces in there. Come back in here and sort of fix it up again so that it matches how it should look in 3D. So I'll have to start a new diffuse color here. I'm going to say 1024 should be enough resolution. I'm going to use a PNG. Probably best actually to always start with a non-lossy format. A lot of people use Targa or TIFF. BMP you're going to be locked in pretty good. But I'm just going to use PNG. It's pretty good. Alright, so first I want to go to flat mode and unhide body. Just kind of get that original skin color that I wanted, depending on what color I prefer. Now we could add a layer for adding details. We'd probably end up wanting to convert to saving as a PSD though for that. Or you can just use merge down when you're happy with the results. Just go with black. In this case, what I would recommend doing is opening up another paint program, because we want these specific polygons to be black. So you can work with switching back and forth between both programs. Just grab this entire group and paint black over it in a new layer. And then when you come back into here, you can go to your material editor, load it, and hit reload, or reload it into the layer. That's with here, file, load bitmap. And then you'll see that black show up in here. Okay, in your paint program, I recommend making a duplicate of your layer so you kind of have a template of where everything is, and render it invisible or locked. And then for these parts, like this, oops, can't get away with that with this part because it's a little bit too close. So let's use the poly select here. And then that way you can go bucket fill. That should take care of the top parts of the eyebrows. We can paint in the details for the bottom part, which should show up around here. Might have some problems with bleed along this edge here, so we probably should have pulled this apart a little more, but I think it's going to be okay. If we wanted, we could start by filling in this part of the mouth with like a red kind of purplish pinkish color. Something like that. And then we'll just add in more detail after. And so save the file and save as a backup copy in Art Backup. In your viewport canvas, under paint behavior, we'll want an X mirror. Let's update that layer. Oh yeah, clone source. I want to use screen rather than current layer. That way we can clone from anything, any image that we put into the screen. We can clone stamp brush right onto the character. So you can create really nice details that way. Let's load up into the current layer, what we did in Photoshop there. There we go. Maybe we'll use the burn inside the mouth a little bit toward the back and on the roof because it will be shadowed. I got the burn turned up quite a bit, so probably turn it down a bit. I can make some tongue detail here. Let's go with this. Dodge. It's not working for some reason. Decrease the radius. There we go. That's good enough for now. We can fix it up in Photoshop. At least now we kind of have some idea where those details should show up on the texture map. And it might be good to see what this looks like with the eyes. As far as painting inside the ears goes, I think I'm just going to use a regular brush with less opacity and kind of rough in some detail at first. Maybe starting with kind of a dark pink hue. So we'll need to turn on the opacity more. We'll go to flat mode. Actually, no, we'll leave this on for now so it's easier to see where we want to paint into. We might create a little bit of hair in here too with the stamp brush. Use burn. If I want to bring back some of that pink, just go like this. And just kind of touch it back in. As if you made it a bit too strong. As you can see, it's painting into both sides, even though it's using separate UV coordinates. And we'll use the blur tool. It's a fairly big radius. We'll smoothen some of this out. Okay, let's see how that looks so far in a lit mode. It looks about right. And let's add a little bit of classical rouge. You could even put like symbols here too. Like you could put whatever symbols suitable to the personality of the character. Maybe a 4-leaf clover or maybe smiley faces. For now, I'm just going to go with a standard reddish color. And use a very low opacity. So normally I would actually make a shape, maybe even just a perfect circle. In this case, I'm just going to go with something a little bit generic and maybe just make just a hint of rouge right here. Maybe that make the nose a little redder. And a little bit of colorization around the eyelid. It's almost like we're doing makeup here. I mean, being that this is... So I'd probably go more with like a symbol or something right here. One thing that's really effective with art is to do things in threes. So you do like a big one, a medium one, and then a small one. The same with like hair. You'd go big piece of hair, smaller piece of hair, and then smaller yet. And if you were to add like 3 ears or something, you do that same sort of thing, kind of symmetrically and descending in size. It works really good with clothing styles. Probably a little bit of pink around the lips would make sense. Because, I mean, they are supposed to be darker colored after all. The expressions stand out a little more. Let's see how this looks with the Mesh Smooth modifier. Looks much better. Looks like some of that paint came through here, but we can fix it up in Photoshop, add a little more detail, add some eyebrows perhaps, and then later on we can add some rigging so we can move the eyebrows around, close the eyes, do blinking, eyelid movement, mouth movement, opening the mouth more for bigger expressions, and shrinking it for like a small little O, all the different phenomes for speech, and then that way you can make your character talk and make expressions, and you can combine the expressions expressions with the phenomes, and you just change the percentage of, with a little dial, of how much it's saying a certain vowel and how much it's doing a certain expression. So like this eyelid could be partly closed, this part of the mouth could come slightly up, maybe the jaw's more down and the mouth's more open. So you can change those different morph targets and make the character, during cinematics, make the character do very expressive animations. And it sounds complicated, but once you get it rigged, making those animations is actually pretty easy. And you'll see what I mean when we get to that part. For the in-game character, we can just use a few general morph targets for general expressions and have the eyes look at stuff using the like program it so the eyes look around if we want to get that detailed. And you can even have the head kind of skew towards the direction that the eyes point, because it is a separate object, so it's easy enough to turn the head, have the neck kind of bend in the direction, which it'll do automatically with the skin mesh. It's just a matter of telling the bone to rotate. It would just combine with the given animation matrix, final matrix for the bone, whatever it ends up with in the animation. If it's pointing a certain direction for that animation, you'd blend the rotation matrix into that so that the head partly rotates in a biased direction for something that the character would be interested in looking at. Sounds complicated, actually is a little bit complicated. As you can see, I went ahead and added a little bit of black along the bottom for the bottom eyelash, directly onto the face texture, and just a little bit on the edge here. These seams show up in the viewport, but as you can see, like if I render it, they're not there. And the exported and imported character, you won't see those seams either. It's just a slight artifact that shows up in the viewport because of the way it's optimizing your scene as you edit. You don't have to worry about that. I was going to fix up this red on the back of the ears, but I actually kind of like it, so I'm just going to leave it. So maybe we'll just go ahead and quickly set up the UVs for the body and paint it, maybe show using the stamp tool to put a couple decals on the shoes. I had hearts in the original because I thought maybe it was going to be a girl, but just so that we can make it a girl or a boy, I'm kind of keeping it generic, so we could go with either. Maybe I'll finish off the tail first. Let's turn off Mesh Smooth, and this way we can work with the lower poly version, which is easier to work with. And use F4, and after symmetry modifier, I'm going to use the UVW unwrap. And I mean, if you want to make sure too, before you do that, that your character mesh's topology is good to go. So you don't want to make any modifications to it. Although it is possible to fix that stuff up later, but you need to collapse it before you do that sort of thing. If you go to edit poly, select polygon, and toggle this drop down, go to selection, and I got side set to forcing, let's say greater than, see if there's anything that needs to be cleaned up. And then less than to see what we got for triangles, although I'm not too worried about those either. And we should have triangles showing up. Yeah, if I select less than, try equal. Oh yeah, you gotta select this arrow thing here. So less than, there should be at least a couple triangles here somewhere. Oh, there's a couple. I'm not really worried about having the odd triangle where the distortions of the mesh aren't gonna affect it. As far as greater than, these are the ones that we might want to fix if we see any. I don't see any. So we can go back up to UVW unwrap. And again, we'll turn off the map seams and just stick to peeling seams. And want to be in edge mode and use point-to-point seams. And actually, just to make sure I'm not missing any of the geometry, let's just go ahead and hide the head. So I'm going to deselect here, we'll select these, and just hide them for now. We could also have gone into isolate mode, but let's remove the mesh smooth on the top of the stack for now. It's not letting me pick point-to-point seams, so we'll go vertex and then back to edge, and it should work now. So we'll probably want the front, this whole area, and then the back, and then the hands we probably want to divide vertically so that we can get this surface and the bottom surface. With the tail, cut a circle around it because it's very much a protruding piece of geometry. If you mess up your seams at all, you can go to this edit seams and then hold down Alt and click on a seam and it'll delete that seam. Just something to keep in mind. For some reason I'm not orbiting around my selection here, so I'll have to set it to orbit around sub-selection, so I think that might have got changed. Let's go to here, here, let's see. That seems kind of hidden because it's kind of inside this little ridge here, which is kind of what we want. And I'm going to split this into two halves. Orbiting quite right for some reason right now. Okay, I'm going to use F3 to see where it is, so we can grab from here. And it'll just auto-connect from there to here, and from here to here, what it's doing is just finding the shortest distance. So sometimes you might have to do them in little batches. We haven't collapsed this, and we got the geometry has the symmetry modifier applied, so it might not be finding the true shortest distance. In fact, it would be a good idea, before we continue, to save this as a new file, then collapse this, like save it before we do that, and then save as a new file, and then collapse this, and then add the UVW unwrap. So once we saved it, I'm going to collapse, save as a new file. Now we can add the UVW unwrap, go to edge mode and point-to-point seams, and turn off the map seams. Go back in, do the same thing we just did. Grab this guy, and it should work out a little bit easier. It should be able to figure it out better now, in theory, because it's not dealing with the symmetry modifier, and the geometry is all kind of collapsed to what it's supposed to be. Okay, now I could have split it just along the bottom and unwrapped it flat, but I think I'm going to do two separate halves so that it stretches out better, and then weld everything together after. This part here is not going to cooperate because this geometry is sticking out straight sideways. So to minimize that problem, we're just going to cut this part off. And if we choose to, we could just weld it back on after we flattened everything, just so we can kind of paint in fur details or something across here without having to worry about the seams. So I'm putting a piece back here so that this can unwrap this way. There we go. Alright, so looking at this, I would say this should unwrap just fine. Since we're still in the seam editor though, we may as well finish off the seams. I think I'll separate the upper body from the lower body. And because of the way I made this, it's pretty much essential to do this part in wireframe mode. We'll start maybe with the shirt. Poly select, expand to seams, help map. We can get away with just doing start help and hit commit and use Relux. And I'm going to go face angles. I'm going to click this checker pattern. Start. Looks good. So that one's pretty much done. Let's straighten it out a bit, move it up. Move it up quite a bit because I'm going to put the pants down below it. Grab the back of the shirt. Help map. Start. Commit. I haven't really needed to stretch out the canvas stretcher yet. Start. Relax. Should be fine. Okay, the squares are approximately the same size already. We'll do a sleeve. This will be a left sleeve. Just mirror this temporarily. Change the size. Same. See, maybe we'll do the hands next. Top of the left hand. Like I was saying, if you choose your seams really carefully, where it's going to unfold, usually you don't get much problems after you use relax and the canvas, and you get pretty good results right from the get-go. And don't forget the insides of the sleeves too. Looks like I'll have to select the stretcher, stretch it out a bit more. There, better. Okay, we'll do the right side after. First we're going to do the left side of the tail. Let's see, oh I got these on the wrong side. Let's just flip this and put these on this side. This one looks like it's a little too big. Okay, back to tail. Start pelt. Looks pretty good. And faces are relaxed. Squares are about the right size. I'll grab this one. And this one's going to be an issue. Might be missing a split on here. No, maybe not. Alright, so I'll just use a really big canvas stretcher. Select stretcher, expand it to so it's giant. There, that's better. Try edge angles. Nope. Face angles, we use smaller increments, maybe 0, 1 here. Still a bit too fast. Let's do one iteration here at a time. That's weird, it did more than one iteration. 0, 0, 1, try that. Try edge angles. It really doesn't like the way I set this up, so in the looks of it I would have been better off to create the seam down this here part or down this one. Oh, I see what the issue is. We need that, because otherwise we're going to have problems. Same on this side. So we'll do pelt again, start pelt, and face. I'm going to do 100 and 0.01, or even 0.1 again. And we're definitely not going to be able to weld it in that little hole, so we'll just keep it out here. And we'll do the same thing on the right side after. Yeah, I got these on the wrong side, this should be on this side. Okay, so just going to do the front of the pants. Move this off over to here for now. Start pelt and relax. You can kind of see where these match up. Same thing on the back. And we'll do one of the shoes. We'll do the left shoe, left side again. I guess we'll work on. We'll need a bigger stretcher, so we'll have to stretch this out. Start pelt, commit, start relax. So we're resolving it kind of strangely. Hopefully it'll work itself out here shortly. If not, I have ways of helping it. Oh, I don't like the way this is set up. Go to edit seams. I'll just use alt click on these because I must have messed something up here. Clicked on the wrong points, so get rid of these and use point to point again. Looks right. Select here, here, one of these. Expand. Oh, must have a hole in my seams here or somewhere. It would seem. We'll just have to hunt it down, fix it up. Again, we'll arrange each element so it's kind of packed tightly into a square and try to scale it down into this 0 to 1 space. So whatever your, as long as the orange boundary is within the square, it should be okay. And at this point, we could check to see if there's anything about the UV mapping we might not like inverted faces. Select inverted. I don't know how it's possible, but somehow all these vertices are inverted. These ones I can understand. Just unselect So now when we go to poly select and hit select inverted, that one should no longer be red. That one should be fine now. Well, we got something down here. Aha. We got something right here too. So that one should be okay now. Because these would have actually shown up as overlap faces when we go to select overlap. Poly select, and let's go overlap first. None, because we already took care of the one that was overlapped. Let's mirror this, see if that fixes it. Yeah, no longer inverted. Okay, so I must have mirrored this and then forgot to unmirror it when I was just making it the same size as this one. So the UVs should be good now, and I'm going to save the UVs. I'll say kid body 1. And now things are more or less set up that we can just start painting on the character body. I'll pick an empty slot. Actually, let's just go Tools, Viewport Canvas. And I'm going to go with kind of a teal color. I'll make it a darker version, sort of a leaf-like color. I'll use a bigger texture map this time. Maybe we'll go with PNG. What I can actually do is apply the base colors in my 2D graphics editor. Okay, so set some base colors here. For the pants, maybe we'll go with like a blue jean material. Okay, let's make sure only selecting what we want to paint here. Because unfortunately some of the paint is bleeding over into other parts. Maybe this will work better. As far as the tail goes, we can go with a sort of a brown-orange. We'll use it in the ears too. Shoe grip, we'll go with the dark gray for now. Oops. I'll make them orange too, just a light orange. These are the insides of the sleeves. Jacket, back, sleeves. Okay, so we've got the base colors going. Let's make a backup copy of this. Okay, so we got our base colors now. Let's go ahead and add in some, I don't know, we'll add maybe a zipper down the front here. Should probably put in the base color for like the collar and this part that goes across here, which I was thinking would be an orange color. I'll just rough it in for now. And actually, we can use the paint behavior. Clone source will be screen, mirroring will be X. And I just kind of want to get a general idea of where the color is by hitting F4. I don't have to go right down against the bottom of the polygons for this, because I can add shadow in under, a little bit of shadow on the edge of it where it connects to the color. So I may use a bit of a darker color, or I could just paint this right down to the bottom and use the burn tool. You'll notice as long as the dot doesn't go over this geometry, it's only going to paint a sort of a spherical area within the point where that point's ray would intersect the geometry. Just knowing that makes it a little bit easier. Now that we got all our base colors in place, we can go ahead and start texturing in some details using the clone stamp. That's where it gets really interesting. I can like look for images of just materials, make whatever modifications I need to them, and then clone stamp parts from them onto the jacket and the jeans or sweatpants or whatever they are. So I got Photoshop over here to the right, and I'm going to use that, and I'm going to use a blending option and give this material more of a material kind of look. We could use clone stamp too, just to sort of add that property. So I'll just give an example. Let's say I just wanted to add material property to this. I can hit Control C and Control Alt V to paste in place. Control Shift V there, and I got this second layer over here, which is hard to see because it's kind of off the screen. And so for that second layer, I'm going to go to blending options, and I could use like bevel and emboss overlay, but I'm just going to use a pattern overlay and turn on the opacity. You can actually change which patterns are available material with this thing. I'm just gonna go for like something like that, just to show that it's kind of a material. And I'm gonna go multiply, so it's multiplying the color value by this color value that it gets from here. And I can exaggerate the effect of the material a little bit here. Maybe make it a finer grain, not so much that you can't tell what's going on here. And we could do that with this, like use a gene material and do that sort of thing for these other objects. You can even add gloss hints and decals and stuff onto the shoe down here. So I'm just gonna go save. It should be kid body. Let's go save as and PNG. So then when we go over into here, load bitmap into current layer, kid body. We can copy the blending option for this onto the other parts of the material that we want to share. So we'd make each piece into a layer and just copy that. We could have made them all onto the same layer and just shared the blending option that way. So hitting F, I'm going to go front view, and I'm going to use this zipper image over here. First, before you do that though, you got to make sure your paint behavior is set. And I'm going to use mirroring X so that anything I do to one side will be copied to the other symmetrically, because I want this to look fairly symmetric for this. And I'm going to use screen to clone source, and now I'll use the clone brush. From the looks of it, I can't do it this way, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure I've saved this, and I'm going to create a plane that's approximately the size I want for the zipper. Be something like that. I can adjust it after, and grab the material editor, and we'll set a diffuse bitmap, and we'll just load that texture image in. Okay, and it's already got UV coordinates automatically, so all we have to do is assign material to the selection and then make it visible in the viewport. Now we can copy anything that's on the screen into here. Let's make sure we got the right object selected and then go into painting it. And maybe we'll start a new layer for this one. Use the clone brush, and holding Alt, we can pick this as the source. Now this zipper is really huge, which might not be desirable. And also I don't want the white to be visible. We could go viewport or screen actually. Okay, so it's not cooperating as far as the white goes. I can just erase along the edges though, I suppose. This is where some other paint program would come in handy, because unless there's something about this that I don't know about. So that's how you can use the clone brush. We're not going to do that for the zipper though, because it just wouldn't make any sense. What we'll do instead is just go in here and copy and paste the zipper. And then this way we got our transparency. We don't have to fight to get our transparency. So I'll uniform scale this down. I mean, this should work. And so let's make this a little smaller. Okay. And I'll just grab this section right about here and hit Control-Shift-C, Control-Shift-V, Control-C, Control-Shift-V. There we go. And hold Shift to drag it straight down. We'll just continue that zipper and do it again. Use space and let's Shift drag this down. And we'll see how that looks. So save it and save as PNG. And then we'll reload this in here. Okay, that's still a little bigger than I wanted it to be. Maybe a little wider than I wanted it to be. So let's make it more narrow, especially where the geometry bulges out here. Right here we can keep it the same, maybe a little bit less wide. And then here throughout the middle we want to definitely squish it in. So that's easy enough to do. We can just grab these layers, hit merge layers, and what we'll do is we'll bend the middle in. And the bottom, can bend the top in a little bit. But mostly the middle we want to bend in. Let's go to the PNG here. Just load that back in again. Let's try that again. Oh, there we go. For some reason it doesn't work the first time sometimes. Anyway, that looks much better. That's exactly what I wanted. I might add a little bit of burn and dodge on this just to kind of force some sort of shadow depth to this. But before I do that, let's turn the opacity way down to like 4 and maybe the radius about 20. So you get this burn going on. Get some nice texturing here. Same thing up here. I'm using such a low opacity value that I kind of get a feel for how much burn I should add before it starts to become too much. Alright, and we'll do that with a dodge too a bit. Just a bit more, reduce the size. I don't want too much dodge up here because the head's going to be shadowing a bit. We'll use occlusion baking later maybe to kind of force some extra shadow detail into here. This is just kind of give it a little bit more of a 3D look. We could use normal maps too to really give this sort of a dynamic lighting effect. Okay, let's do a little bit of a burn along the edge of the zipper, just to show that it's kind of that the material is kind of pushing in a little bit where the zipper is. And I'll add some dodge over here. Now we just got to do the same thing for the back. I got this fur material here to load onto this little plane here. We can rotate this and paint directly onto here. I'll just drag this over to the right here. One thing we could also have done is used a stencil, like a mask or like a color, something like this. You can load your customized ones if you want. The masks you can use to create like transparency. So if we use something like this, we'd get a circular image when we use our color or whatever texture we're using. So it only paint that. If you want a specific shape like a maple leaf or something, you could just create a black and white sort of silhouette, maybe fuzz the edges a bit, and then use that as your transparency mask, and then use like some sort of green, red, yellow for the leaves. Right now we're mostly interested in the brush images settings. If we're going to do projection, we're using hit normal. That's where the ray is going to hit, and I'm using an older version of Max, so when I click paint on and I go to diffuse color, it always wants to create a new texture, and I don't really want to overwrite my current one. I probably should start a new one here anyway, just so that I have sort of backups of my work as I progress. So I'm going to call this Kid Body 2, save. Oh, that's wrong. Kid Body 2. Okay, I'm using the 2048 because I want to have lots of detail here. And hit OK. Now the problem with that is that there's nothing in here now. It just over-wrote with the default color. So what I'll do is I'll just pick one of these, for example, and I'm going to load bitmap into current layer. And I pick Kid Body 1, or I could use the Kid Body 2 PSD that I had made before, but we'll go with Kid Body 1 PNG. I think I have it in uncompressed lossless. Okay, I'm gonna hit P here. It's kind of airbrush based on the fur flows. So this texture is nice because it has fur going in multiple different directions, and it's easy enough to just rotate it, or even manipulate your view so that it's just the right angle, and then rotate that and use the clone. Just make sure you have it set to mirroring X first if you want to mirror both sides, and clone source from screen. And what we'll do is we'll save the settings here, and then that way if we come back to using this, we can just load up those settings and we don't have to check off all our little boxes and change our brush settings and stuff. Another thing you can do too is you can save bitmap flattened as in here, so you can save it out as another bitmap file. You do that for all layers or individual ones. In Photoshop, I kind of added these flowers on the shoes, but they didn't go in the right spot. So I'll show you some tricks if you don't know them. What we can do is click on this little toggle for 2D view, and you can change your viewing with this. So we're going to go 1:1. We could use the clone brush to move the flower over, starting at one end here and then starting here and going this way. I think we might actually have to go this way because it's kind of unwrapped from the side of the shoe rather than the middle at the back. And hit F for front. And actually it's easy enough too to just create a plane in this view, and then just load the decal that you want to put on there as a bitmap. Okay, so loaded in this flower, and I'm going to go assign material to selected, show material in the viewport, and keep in mind there isn't any transparency here, it just says white, and this background has white also. So if we wanted to use transparency, we'd probably use a brush images and use the color for this, and then create a mask for this, where this part you just select all of it, fill that area with white, and then fill this with black, and then this would be transparent, and you could just stamp it on wherever you wanted. If you wanted a whole bunch of them, you could stamp them all over the place, and we could change the size of it and everything, the opacity. So maybe we'll actually go ahead and do that. So instead of cloning from off of here onto here, by the way, we'd have to change the size of this and rotate it, because we're going to end up with this white border around it, which we don't really want. If we would have created the exact same yellow border by using the eyedropper and then picking off of a screenshot of the flat version here, could easily pick this color and then just flood fill this with yellow, and then when we go in here and clone stamp it, it wouldn't make any difference. I'm going to try it this way. I'm going back into my paint program. I'm going to create a transparency thing. I could use magic select to grab this white. I could also use smart select and just grab the flower. Okay, and I'm going to contract the selection. So modify, contract, Nope. I want to expand, I guess. I want to go selection, modify, expand. I'm going to say 2 pixels. This is going to be our mask. I'm going to fill this with white and then just put a little bit of soft kind of gray as a single boundary around the edge of this. First of all, let's flood the outside with pitch black. It can't be just approximately black. It's got to be 0, 0, 0 here, because we want absolute transparency. Okay, well, I'm just going to go to paintbrush here and just paint this black. And then we'll go select inverse, Control-Shift-C, Control-Shift-D to paste in place. So now we got a new layer. Let's hide this layer actually, and just paint black behind it with the flood tool. And then go to this layer, and I just want to get rid of these little imperfections here. I'll just use the brush for that. We'll do like maybe 1 pixel gray, and this will all be white. So let's go reselect. And I'm gonna have to zoom in here and change the selection a little bit. Get rid of that and that. So let's just paint this pitch white. Deselect, blending option, maybe a single outer glow. This isn't all 100% black. Going back to brush, and I want to hit E. That's my shortcut for erase. Just make sure you erase this unwanted stuff. Okay, and let's change the blending options a little bit. I want to go down to 1 pixel, maybe 2. Say normal. I'll change this to like a medium gray. Turn the range down again all the way. You can see there's other imperfections here. Okay, and that's good enough, so we can change the range again. We just got this sort of subtle gray around the edge. And turn down the opacity just a little bit. And we'll use that as a mask. So I'll say flower mask. Alright, so in 3D Studio, browse, we got to pick a directory rather than the images themselves. So I'm going to pick this directory, but we can also drag those into our custom brushes. If you look up here, you can see what directory you need to drag them into. So while that's open, we can do this. And once you found them, hold down Control, select them, use the back to button to get back to where you were. Paste them in there, and then hit reload. Oh, it's not working. So we'll try saving these as TIFF instead, because it looks like that's what they're using for these ones. So we'll do a flower mask, say OK, and then open up the flower. Save that as a TIFF also. Okay, now I hit reload and custom maps show up. So I'm going to pick the flower and I'm going to pick the mask I made. I could add a bunch of little flowers if I wanted onto the shoes to just give them a little bit more character. And maybe I'll use the randomize, brush radius, opacity. I suppose we could go from like 95 or 90 to 100 opacity. Give it some spacing and scatter. Maybe I'll add some random rotation. Look for some texture, maybe from a tire or something, and edit it. And we'll just make a little bit of texture around the edge using clone stamp. And then we can go in and we can use the burn tool and the dodge tool and so on and so forth. Paint in some details, maybe some gloss, and kind of make it match up with the bottom grip a little bit. So maximum radius, I'm going to say 37. Opacity. And we want to use maximum hardness, I would say. But we can go to the hardness factor here and just boost it up. And boost up spacing minimum. Yeah, we could do something like that, but I think I'd prefer to just place flowers exactly where I want them. Right now, it looks like it's set to rotate as I move the brush, which isn't what I want right now. I actually just want them to stay facing the same direction. So instead of random, I'm going to change this to none for rotation. Or we could even go follow stroke, and we could create these little slightly rotated flowers. So what I'll do is I'll create a string, sort of like a bead of flowers that will go all the way around each shoe. Let's just make sure we add a new layer before we start that. I'm going to clone brush from this actually, because it's more level, and I already kind of have it set up exactly with the size and position I want it. So I'll use F4 to kind of see where the center of the shoe is. And it's a little misleading from the geometry, so we'll start about here. Use Alt, click. Should see a preview of what you're about to paint. Yeah, it's still not centered. That's more where we want it. I'm not sure if there's a mask color that you can pick in the clone brush settings, if there is clone brush settings. So right click it, I get nothing there. So one thing that we might want to do is hold shift and paint. In fact, let's go to a hard solid brush, or we could just paint the yellow back in, but we can crank up the hardness here. So hold down shift. Actually, first let's take down the radius and hold down shift to kind of unpaint stuff from the layer. If it's on background, I don't think you can do that, but if it's on a new layer, you can. But I mean, if you had an image where it was skin or something and you just need to sample in skin into an area and then clone it around, that'd be fairly easy because you don't have to worry about transparency. Go back to the clone brush and maybe I'll add that in a new layer and use, boost the size, and go at an angle where it's going to kind of make sense. Come at it from this angle. Use F4 so we can kind of see how much space and geometry I'm covering for each flower. I'm just using the shift key to fix that up. We'll reduce the size and put just some baby ones in between. And I'd probably add something to give kind of the impression of shape within the shoe, or even like leather stitching or something like that. Which again, you could use a brush image to use the follow stroke, and then you can guide those stitches in the direction you want to go. I went ahead and created this stitch mask in the same folder, saved it out into the custom brushes folder, and just the mask. Don't need any texture color information. I'm just going to use a mask and reload custom. Oh, I forgot to save it as a TIFF. So save it as a TIFF first, and then we can reload it, and then we grab it and turn the color off. So it's just going to use whatever color I have up here, and I think I'll just use black stitching, or we could use like a brown, dark brown or something. And I'm using follow stroke, add a layer, reduce the radius a bit. Okay, so we need to boost the spacing more. We'll just click and then click again and drag. And perhaps I should just make this smaller, decrease the spacing a little bit. There we go. That's what we're looking for. And the first click, it won't accept it, which is good because it's not going to be rotated in the correct direction. And I'll add a little bit of stitching here. If I was using a tablet stabilizer, probably get smoother lines. Right now I'm just using my mouse. Okay, well that's going to be in the distance, so you're not really going to see these details. I just wanted to create an example. In fact, you probably more so see stitching on the clothing rather than where I'm putting it. Like for example, something like this. And where the pockets are, we could create some texturing and some shadow to kind of give the impression of pockets. So let's carry some of this stitching from here. And down the side of the pants there should be some, because that's pretty common. Maybe do 2 of them. Maybe along this brim of the jacket. This is a little overboard on the details here because most of this you're never going to be able to see. Only in close-ups during cinema you'll kind of get these subtle details. I kind of made the mistake here of having the viewport camera zoom too far back, and consequently the stitches are really close together and smaller. When you're closer, I got that backwards. But, depending on where your camera is, like if the brush is closer, it's going to make smaller stitches. If it's further, it'll make bigger ones. Just depends on your radius and your distance. It'll definitely add some stitches to the ends of the sleeves. Again, the angle that you're painting at can make a difference on how your stitches are going to end up looking. Now, if you don't have Mirror X turned on right now, it's only going to be stitching on one side. Might even add some stitching down the side here too. Thinking I'm just going to go to background layer and use burn, just kind of create the impression. There could be a pocket here. So maybe I'll use dodge here to make this puff out a bit. Another thing, I want to bring down the hardness to 0. Boost the radius, decrease the opacity, I don't want it to be too crazy. And turn the mask off. Oh, and change the spacing back to 0.25. I must have hit some kind of hotkey, so I'm going to save this so I don't lose my progress. Okay, so I just went into File, loaded it back into the Layers dialog. Go back with dodge again. I'm going to say rotation none for now. Paint behavior. This needs to be changed to 0.25. Make sure you're not hitting any numbers until you've actually got your blinking cursor in here, because those can act as hotkeys and that could mess you up. You could even duplicate this layer and make these sorts of modifications, which would probably be a better idea. I went a little heavy on the opacity for that dodge. Okay, I'm going to go with burn. Just kind of give it a slightly bulging look, like there could be a pocket there. Yeah, this is a little bit too bright. What I'm going to do is maybe clone something from here to just kind of fix it up a bit. Must have grabbed it in just the right spot for the pattern to repeat. And I'm going to go with burn again, reduce radius, just give a slight impression that there's a pocket here. Create the impression that there might be something in the pocket. Okay, maybe a little over the knees, dodge. A little burn to show some wear and tear around the knees. Smudge it a bit, a little white right here to show some wearing of the fabric. And for all the details we're putting in the front, geez, burning this was actually a bad idea. This looks terrible. It looks like there's huge stains all over the shirt. So maybe we'll just use the clone stamp and try to fix that up. And maybe we won't mess around with that anymore. We'll fix it up in Photoshop. What else can we do? We'll do the fingers and the palms of the hands. And we actually already have a reference that we can use for that. So let's unhide that. Unhide by name. Unhide the plain hand. I was just using a little kid hand to try to figure out how to make the shape of the hand. We can use the clone tool to add some sort of texture details like fingernails and such to the fingers. We can even paint them in, just paint them in so that it looks similar. Before we do this though, let's hide the head. If you have it all as a single object, you can actually just hide parts of the geometry. Okay, top view, T. Okay, make sure we've picked the correct object to paint. Use clone stamp. And apparently my source is very low resolution, so these details won't be that great. Using Alt, grab right there. Oh, my opacity's turned down all the way. Let's crank it up. Boost the hardness. Yeah, we'll turn down opacity a bit. Reduce the hardness a bit. So we got a different tone of skin here. What we'll do is reduce the opacity even more and just try to get inside some of these subtle hints and then just to where things are, and then try to clean it up in Photoshop. Make sure this is on the right setting here. So it's, yes, this definitely doesn't look right. In fact, you know what we should do? Hold Control and click, grab the color, paint this back in. What we'll do is just use this as a reference and paint in those details by hand. So a slightly more purplish version of this. Reduce the size. This fingernail is actually pretty small. At least if I do it this way, I get an idea of where these fingernails are. We can just touch it up in Photoshop. Apparently little kids have very tiny fingernails. If you're using another paint program, a texturing program like Mudbox, you can actually distort this thing and make it match up to fit onto here, and then change the hue and such and actually get it to match right up, and then just stencil it on or project it on or clone copy it or whatever. I'm just putting these little reference cues in here. Give it a little bit of subtle detail in Photoshop. These will just work as a guide as to where I want to kind of put stuff. Let's make sure that we unclick this paint thing here so it saves out the file. I think there's also like a right click when you have this active and you can save it out that way. We can go back to smooth. Okay, so let's go over to Photoshop. Alright, so loading up that texture, can grab a hand reference and we'll actually do some clone stamping and subtle painting in here. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to zoom in, rotate this, stretch out parts of it as I need using this, and we could even use liquify right here to kind of stretch out parts of it, but I don't want all of this copied onto here. I want just subtle hints of how it should look. So the first thing I'm going to do is make sure that the colors match up, and I can do that with modifying these values in here. So make sure we kind of have approximately the same hue going on. We can go to levels, for example, and we can change the blue, red, and green values until we get something close. We may have to adjust the brightness to the overall and play with the color balance a bit. So we got a fairly close match here. I'm going to rotate this and we'll use the stamp brush. First of all, we got to change the size a bit. In fact, what we could do is just temporarily put this over top, get sort of a similar shape, and use the opacity over on this side to kind of see where it belongs. And once we got a fairly similar shape, then we can go ahead and work out those details with the clone brush. Move it over, turn the opacity back up, and we might have to fix this up a bit because this finger isn't 100% perpendicular, so just get some subtle hints in here. First of all, let's duplicate this layer so we don't mess it up, and I'll just do this a little bit because I don't want this gray in here. Okay, and then we'll go to clone. So we want this. We can actually erase from this layer to get the background layer back. Just keep in mind the background one still has that gray on it. So you may even want to duplicate this layer too, so you don't have that gray. But you first want to erase all of these. I'll show you another way that you can clone brush. One thing you can do is you can go to your material editor, grab an empty material that's not being used, and just load that into a slot, then hit View Image, and see this way you have it in 3D Studio, so you're able to clone off it. Okay, so I want to clone off of here, and I can use my zoom, hold Control and Alt to get specific zoom, and I should be able to clone brush off of this. Yes, if I hold down Alt, it's going to let me pick off of here. I think I'll maybe do this. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing with this side. Alt, do it again. The reason I have to do that is because I have to hold Alt to rotate, so it's going to extract from the wrong place. Kind of go at an angle here and zoom back. Hold click. I'm not too worried if some of the detail goes onto this part of the shoe. I'm kind of doing things in an order where it's not going to matter. Because what I can do later is I can just use the eyedropper in flat mode and hold on the space bar at intervals and just go around the edge and clean it up if I need to. And because I'm doing this at different depths, or painting this, it might not look quite right along the side, so I'll have to make a decision about what I might want to do to correct that. Zoom back, grab from here. Since this is really dark, it'll be fairly easy to use smudge and blur and some paint touch-ups too, or even some clone with some opacity setting on it to just kind of blend it together. It's dark enough, I'm not going to be too worried about it being perfect. Now for the top part of the grip, if it bleeds onto the edge there a little bit, that's fine. Back here. Now I just do some touch-ups. It's a matter of picking paint, go into flat mode, and you can hold Control, click to grab the color, and I'm going to use a little bit of hardness and decrease the radius a bit, and I'm holding space to get straight lines here. Right here I don't really have to, but here I will. Space. So far so good. Just remember when you change the angle, where it's starting the line is going to change. So that's what happens if you, so you're going to have to click, hold space, click again. We'll clone from on here, and we'll turn the opacity down. So just kind of blending the two together. So that way I retain some of that grippy look that I had before with this new grip. And we could do this in layers too, and then just change the opacity for the layer, which would probably be a better way to do it, because then you can adjust it. So that kind of has the advantage of making the bottoms of the shoes look a little dirty. We'll go into regular, deactivate, and save as PSD. So flatten layers, save current texture. You may notice that in the viewport, by default, your texture resolution doesn't look so great. If you're ever curious as to what it's actually going to look like though, just click render or use the hotkey. So what we're going to do is we're going to export this so that we can load it into Mudbox. And what I would suggest doing anytime you want to do this is go to an angle where you're not going to be selecting geometry you don't want to select. Oops. And go to the selection mode right here and hit geometry. So you're only going to select geometry. Select all of it and then export selected, because you may have other things in the scene that you don't want to export. I'm going to export as an FBX. I'm going to say Mudbox Kid 1. And I'll just go with default Autodesk Media Entertainment. Don't really need those for that. So it turns out I probably should have stayed with the original user-defined I had set there. Cameras, don't need those. Lights, nope. Just want the geometry. Units are set to centimeters. Format, I'm going to go with the typical 2012 format. When you open it in Mudbox, you may notice that it says T-shapes in the mesh, or have other complaints. Just hit keep all, because we're only worried about painting on the mesh. We're not going to do any sculpting. Depending on the scale of your model, you might not even be able to see your model, so you may have to make some adjustments to the scale before exporting, or just figure out where the model is. Sometimes units has something to do with that. Those are things you may need to check into. I've loaded this, or imported this stencil, not stamp, but stencil. If you hold down Alt, the left mouse button will control your rotation, middle button pans, and right one zooms. If you hold down S, the same sort of thing. You can use the right one to scale, and the middle to move it, and the left rotate. Using Alt, see if we can get zoomed right up to the shoe here. And I want to add this brim that I made. It's kind of like a sort of a shiny space boot type of brim. It was made out of a photograph that I found. So we can actually edit the stencil itself so it conforms to the shape that we have in our viewport. Make sure we are in paint tools here. We can use projection painting. So I'm just going to right scale it so it's about the same width. Before we continue, we have to go edit stencil. And then check the on checkbox. In stencil, we're going to go add stencil and grab that brim and activate it. Now, should be able to go edit stencil and should be able to use the grab sculpt. shape it in a way that it'll conform to what we're looking at. Before we do that though, let's use this Alt here, zoom in a little bit. I was trying to get this to kind of conform to what we want to paint. Okay, so we're going to hit done. So it applies that new stencil, and then try to use the projection paint. We're going to need a smaller brush here, so I'll go with 0.4 because I have a fairly small character here. I have to use very small numbers. And I actually kind of like this golden brim better so far than I did the orange. I don't mind the orange, but this sort of matches a little bit better. We can do color treatments after too if we need to. What we forgot to do though is we forgot to select mirror. Any relatively forward-facing polygons should work pretty good. Any steep angles, it can kind of create problems in any paint program. Just make sure you don't color outside the lines. As long as that dot is touching polygons within the boot, should be fine. Edit stencil. Let's make sure we use a smaller brush because that's not going to work out. I'll use 0.4 again. However, using the stencil brush isn't really my favorite technique in Mudbox. Turn off the stencil, and I'll save my progress so far. We're going to go export screen to PSD. And I'll call it back boot. And it'll put it in Photoshop. And here we can do any kind of Photoshop style of editing, and it'll use that as a projection back onto the original texture. The way to do it is we can turn off the visibility of this lighting here. Since we had it in flat, we don't have to worry about that. And right where it says Mudbox texture paint, create a new layer. The new layer we're going to merge down after, and then we'll save it out. So this layer is where we're going to add more image detail. So let's open up our little reference texture. Hit Control A, Control C, and Control V, paste it in. And we're not going to want to go down the steep edges too much. I mean, we can, but it's just going to create a weird distortion down the side. It's just an artifact of the limitations of projections. I don't want to go off of this onto the boot, so I'm going to probably cut this so that it fits on here and it doesn't overlap onto anything I don't want it to paint. And I'll even trim a little bit more than I need to. Let's take a look at this. Yeah, okay, so we'll go erase. I'm going to hold down shift to get straight lines here and erase until, actually let's use a fairly opaque erase with a very hard brush. What I'm doing is I'm kind of making sure that it won't overlap where I don't want it to, and I'll just paint that on at a different angle. I can see that this red is visible all the way around. Doesn't look like we're going to project this down any really steep angles. So that should be good. First I'm going to merge down and then save. So going back into Mudbox, re-import, puts it in a stencil. So then you can use projection and then you can just paint in here. There's still a lot of things about Mudbox that I'm still learning, so there's probably a lot of tricks that I don't know that I can't tell you. Okay, so using the clone tool, I can grab from here. Using control, just kind of getting under these edges here. And a lot of this too, you can go into 2D mode and you can make corrections in there. So it's kind of like going into like a Photoshop with the UV layout version and just go ahead and tweak in there, painting around the edges. You just kind of have to use your intuition. So for some of this, I'm just going to use blur to kind of patch it up when I get that far. I mean, I could just airbrush a lot of these details in and just use a few varieties of colors and get most of the same details. So let's go to paintbrush and just paint some basic brown down here. I think from this, it'll be easy enough to understand as a reference where everything is going to go, and we can do some more painting in the 2D version. So just to kind of give you an idea of other things you can do, as you can see there's stamp, there's material presets that you can start with. Burn and dodge and blur, you can modify hue, you can desaturate with sponge, I believe that's what that's for. And we're going to go into sculpt tools, play with grab a little bit. So for example, his chest actually should be a little more out and the belly should be a little more in. So I'm going to pull the chest out a bit, as well as this collar, puff it out a bit, push the tummy in a tiny bit right here. It's not really that the tummy is sticking out in the front and the back as much as it looks like. It's just the thickness of the coat. I want to thicken out the coat up here a bit. I mean, these aren't really necessary modifications, but they're just little tweaks that you can do. Yeah, I think that should be good. We could even push the zipper in a little tiny bit, but would have to go with a smaller brush, smaller sculpting brush. And let's see what our mesh looks like with a display wireframe. And if you need to smoothen out certain parts of the mesh, there's a few different things you can do in here. We actually could have even used the bulge brush to kind of bulge this out a bit. That's a bit much. Bring down the strength and the size quite a bit. Let's bring down the strength a little more. Just want a little bit more there. So holding down control while doing it kind of does a bit of the opposite. So if you did try playing with Mudbox and you exported it and re-import into 3D Studio, you can use the pick material from object, get these materials back into your material editor, and just click on that M beside diffuse and look at the bitmap parameters to see where it stored them and what they're called. So they're in scene assets, untitled files, and they just have these generic names. So what we'll do is we'll rename them. So I'll say body material, and I'll rename this one hair material. We'll be a bit more specific and say call it kid hair or something like that. Kid, although it's not very specific as to what kid we're talking about. Kid body, kid head. So we gotta change this one to kid hair. Gotta change this one, kid head. Change this one to kid body. Oops, did that one wrong. Grab this one and change it to kid body. Now we got our materials back, and we don't have our references or anything anymore, although we can just use merge to get them in here. But since we don't really need them anymore, we're just going to leave them behind. And if we load up kid body in Photoshop or whatever paint program you use, so we know that these ridges are going where the geometry should go. So you don't want to stretch it out over top. This is probably a ridge that folds underneath, or actually no, this would be on, yeah, this would be on the top folding into the boot. This part would get dark because this is the part where the foot's kind of sinking into the boot, and this is the bottom outside rim down here. Duplicate the layer, and actually I'll just grab this stuff here and kind of paste it in between, and then that way I can sort of distort it and blend and blur it, paint with it, and get something that looks reasonably good. Can't actually do that because, yeah, it's gonna have to go on top. So this layer is just gonna act as filler. Let's use erase, turn the opacity down, something like that. And we just want this edge to show up. And then otherwise, I mean, we can even use smudge. And as long as this is going far enough that it's going past the red, it should work. Provided you have the space outside the lines so that you can get away with this one. This part doesn't really require much detail. It's a very small texture area that's for some reason really spread out on the EVW map. Can merge this down. Don't really need a whole lot of detail here. Lots of this you won't be able to see. Mostly we want to create impressions. Impressions of the metallic kind of material here. I mean, we can even use clone stamp, turn the opacity down. Just do stuff like this to kind of patch up some of this orange. Better yet, we can take the original one that we were going to use with the stencil and just kind of figure out approximately where it should run, work in a way that kind of matches what it was doing on the geometry when we're painting on it. Use the smudge. And we can even use the clone brush. And you can actually mirror your cloning too in Photoshop if you go into the brush settings. Okay, so I'm going to duplicate this layer and just use it over here as filler, and then use the erase tool with it. And some smudge. What we may need to do is go back into the viewport canvas painter and just kind of touch up where these two sides would connect so that you don't see any kind of seam. I'm going to hit Control V again so I can paste one of these in. Distort it so that we get a general match. And just use erase and distort so everything kind of blends nicely. And maybe a little smudge. I'll go ahead and just keep filling in those details. I would say around in here up to this edge should be a gradual phenomenon where it slowly gets darker going into the boot. And I'll probably use the paintbrush to finish this off. Let's go along the bottom of this too, here along the very bottom. Yeah, we'll do the final touch-ups in the viewport canvas. And the reason for that is it's going to be easier to figure out exactly where we should apply our black paint and to fix up our seams. Okay, so let's make a copy of this. I'll call it KidBody2. Make a PNG copy too. Make sure to update the material so it's using KidBody2 instead of the original. Then we can go to viewport canvas. And before we do anything, let's make a copy of this and make a new backup. Paste it in here. I just want to save it as that. Now, placed it with gray. So we'll open the material editor. And I'll just copy this back into here. And then open it. So now we're painting on that. Pick the brush. As you can see, we get our full texture resolution back. And actually, it didn't turn out too bad. This part's a little bit strange. The seams don't even show up. That would be right on the very back here. It looks actually quite fine. Once you get really close, then you can kind of tell. So I'm just going to use a clone brush and perhaps clone maybe this part right over to here. Captured it with the circle. There, seam's gone. And I want to make this kind of black in here, so I'm just going to go with a regular standard brush of black. And I can even catch part of the leg and that'll be fine. And I'm going to hold down space as I do this. Maybe I'll reduce the radius a little bit here. By holding down space, I can draw straight lines. Okay, radius is a bit small for this part here. Just keep in mind where the middle of your ray is going to intersect with the polygons. That's sort of what I had in mind. Bring the opacity way down, and I'm just going to airbrush in this bit of shadow here inside the edge of the boot. It takes a long time to make these characters if you're doing it from scratch like this. Once you got a character though, you can modify some of your older characters, improve them, change them. Now the nice thing about it is, once you've got your character, which is more or less a puppet, once you have all the rigging and animation stuff set up, actually animating the character, bringing life to the character, making them so that they can breathe, making so they can blink and look around, make the hair flow. Once all that stuff's set up so that it can work, it's actually not hard to create quite a few animations, because all you're really doing is creating different poses. And you can even use references of people doing things, like if somebody's doing gymnastics, like doing flips or martial arts, you can pose the character in a very similar manner at various keyframes, and the computer will do the rest of the work. So animating them is actually not that hard. The part that seems to be tedious, well, it's not really tedious if you enjoy it, I enjoy it, but the part that takes a long time is actually creating the character initially.